We would like to welcome everyone to our Bountiful City Council work session today, Tuesday, January 10th, and we will first begin with Mr. Alan West, our IT Director for Bountiful Fiber Project Update.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. To begin this presentation, I wanted to go through a timeline of what we've been through over the last few years on this project. Spring of 2020, during this time, city elected officials and staff began hearing more from concerned citizens about their frustrations and difficulty of obtaining reliable and high-quality internet services in Bountiful. Maybe some of you have heard that prior to that time, but that's when it started bubbling to the top as far as we were aware. So July of 2020, Utopia, prompted by residents, gave a presentation at a council work session explaining their history and the potential of building a fiber to the home network in Bountiful. Fall of 2020, members of the city council and city staff have conversations with incumbent providers about their ability and willingness to provide fiber and or reliable high-speed connections to all parts of Bountiful. These conversations continued sporadically through at least May of 2021. February 23rd, 2021 was the first work session that I presented, and it was a Fiber 101 class. Essentially, it was talking about the technical capabilities of fiber, how future-proof it is, what the life of fiber might be in an installed environment. And at that point, the mayor and council requested that we research the potential of building a fiber to the home network here in Bountiful. A couple months later, we released a request for information, a little less formal than an RFP, and we created a fiber project team, which consisted of Richard Higginson, councilman, Gary Hill, and Clint, city attorney, city engineer, Alan Johnson, Power Department Director, and a few others, Galen Rasmussen, Assistant City Manager, and a couple other staff members. The team evaluated all RFI responses and selected 4 potential providers for in-person meetings. So in July, we met with Strata Networks, Google Fiber, Entry Point Networks, and Utopia Fiber. Strata and Entry Point they presented a very compelling case that there were real potential benefits for the city owning the project. I think going into the process at this point, there were several of us in the team that just thought we could just hit the easy button and go with whoever could build it the fastest. But as we started seeing from Entry Point and Strata, there were reasons to stop and think about it, in our opinion, a little bit more deeply. August 24th, the results of the RFI were shared with the mayor and council. Potential benefits of a city-owned network were discussed. The council approved engaging the services of Magellan advisors to perform a feasibility study. And we were directed by council and mayor to proceed with that. March 22nd, 2022, we reported to the council and mayor on the status of the feasibility study. I'll just go back to this. There were quite a few interesting results of the study. To me, one of the most interesting things was that over 60% of the respondents indicated that they would, all things being equal, they would prefer to have the city provide the fiber services compared to incumbents or a new provider, all things equal. So a couple months later, working with Magellan advisors, we presented the results of the feasibility study at another work session. Concerns about designing a fiber network using existing and future aerial infrastructure were discussed. Questions about using microtrenching were also considered. The council requested that staff research these options. You may recall we had quite a lengthy discussion with Alan Johnson about the need to replace poles, whether we incorporate that project into this, do we bond for more and include the pole replacement in this process? And then we started realizing that was complicating the whole fiber project so much, and we weren't sure it was a good fit to work with these projects together. So June, a couple months later, the mayor and council gave approval. After we researched these things, council gave approval to release a request for proposal, asking for responses from providers to partner with Bountiful City in a city-owned, provider-built, operated, and maintained fiber network. So we worked with not only John Honker with Magellan Advisors, who had done the feasibility study, but we also worked with Keller and Heckman law firm that we engaged to help with the RFP process to build and create it and review it to make sure we had everything covered. And as you can imagine, an RFI being a very informal process, we just want information from whoever can provide it. An RFP, we specified it in a more detailed fashion. We identified we wanted a city-owned project. We wanted to have an open network, so any ISP could provide services. We had some other criteria in that RFP. That was not only released to the public, but also posted on our website. And November 1st, that was when the RFP was released. And the deadline for those responses was December 1st. And on the 12th, our fiber team reviewed all of the responses and identified 2 vendors who met the requirements for the RFP. We invited Utopia Fiber and Strata Networks to meet with our team and requested that they respond to several follow-up questions. Some of those follow-up questions consisted of taking advantage of federal funding, CARES Act, a couple other things that would provide services to low-income areas. Also, we were concerned about their disaster recovery plans and their redundant network operations centers. So on December 22nd, trying to get in under the holiday deadline, and we wanted to get moving on this, we met with representatives from Utopia Fiber and Strata Networks. Our team evaluated the responses to the RFP in addition to the vendors' responses to the follow-up questions. We discussed options moving forward and came to a consensus on a recommendation to present to the mayor and council, which brings us to tonight's meeting. So I'm not sure how much you want to go over the staff report, but I can answer questions regarding that, and we can proceed with that.
Alan, maybe you could summarize in the staff report some of the reasons that for the recommendation, and then just present the recommendation to the council.
Okay. I have a couple slides that might step us through that quite quickly. So the RFP reports the results. Strata Network had a range of the total projected cost of $53 to $60 million. Utopia had a proposal of $45 million. Some of that difference is related to Utopia being a quasi-governmental agency. I'm not sure the exact governmental agency, and some of the markup isn't there. Construction timeline was interesting because Utopia had already substantially completed the design. They estimated that from the time of a contract approval, they could begin construction in 6 months. Strata wasn't too far behind. It's 10 to 12 months. The first connections, you can see the differences there, 18 months versus 10 months. And then the project completion, 3 years to 4 years versus 2 years to just under 3 years. The construction detail, I threw a couple of these things together just to show that Strata had a 82% boring, and they anticipated using some aerial, micro trenching only in rare cases. We had actually met with Strata on the side several months ago to evaluate the feasibility of micro trenching. Our staff was pretty much okay with that, and I think just prior to a previous meeting, Alan Johnson sent us some more information regarding some concerns about micro trenching. But the preferred, for us, the preferred process is directional drilling or boring. Also, the network architecture was a critical thing. We like the active Ethernet. That means that every single location gets 100% of what they're being sold. In fact, in some cases, most providers specify their connections to meet 110% of the sold bandwidth. So if somebody has 1 gig, it'd be 1.1 gig. XGS hybrid PON is a passive network approach that splits out the signal through some splitters that don't require power. It'd be a long, complicated process to tell you about that, but it's just essentially shared connections. And it would be shared among 32 or 64, maybe even more people that would be allocated a certain bandwidth, and then possibly depending on the usage, like 6 o'clock at night. I don't know how many of you noticed that, but yeah. Strata made us feel comfortable that they could size it with enough capacity that that wouldn't be an issue. But they also indicated that that would be a less expensive solution. But that didn't quite jive with their proposal.
So, Mayor, may I ask a question, or would you rather I wait?
Sure.
So, am I okay in, just for my own understanding, that active Ethernet is a quicker, more reliable delivery, correct?
Active
To sum up?
Ethernet gives 100% bandwidth to every user. The PON, or passive network, is,
Is like a party line from the 60s.
yeah.
Got it.
And I think is to give them credit as the technology is advancing. There's a GPON, there's a PON, and then a GPON, which is gigabit PON, and then there's the XGS PON, which is a little bit higher. So they're developing a little bit at the same time, but it's still shared. This just gives you a little bit of a graphic that was also in the staff report. Just the top one is just showing we have individual switches out in huts, network huts around the city, and then it just has a direct connection to each subscriber. And then based on what their subscription level is, we can just provide whatever they ask for. Regarding the residential rates, shows you the comparison there. Not much difference on price as far as that goes. And then down at the bottom, there's an estimated breakdown of, there's a $7 charge built into this to future-proof the system, to plan for and be able to maintain and replace equipment. An operator fee, infrastructure fee would go to Bountiful to help with the operations and maintenance from our side. And then down towards the bottom, that $18 ISP fee that would be just part of the package. And then the subscribers would have the option to select whatever ISP they want. And finally, we analyzed the fiber to the home current networks that they have installed. On the left-hand side is Strata networks. They're completed networks, basically Roosevelt and Uinta Basin, Vernal, Duchesne, Altamont, and Neola. And they have a couple that are under construction, and American Fork is pending, I believe. And then Utopia/UIA shows those that are completed. They have several under construction. And towards the bottom are a couple interesting ones that are More important for us is the Woodland Hills is a completed city-owned project, and then the Idaho Falls and Bozeman Fiber are city-owned projects that are under construction. So as we come to the council and present this, any more questions?
I did have one question, Alan.
Yes.
I had a resident approach me before our meeting started and ask a question about bonding. I gave the response that I feel like we've talked about in prior briefings, but feel like as our expert, I should ask you, and that way they and anyone else listening will have the answer. So I've always understood that in pursuing this path, it would be a subscriber-based bond that would fund the build-out of a city-owned network, and that if I chose to do the city-owned fiber network at my home, but you did not, it would be my subscription fees that would pay back that bond, and if you chose not to be a subscriber, then you would not be participating. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct, and that was one of the very first requirements that council and mayor gave us to begin with, that we would not build a utility model, which means everybody gets it. It would be a subscriber-based model. Regarding the bond, I'm not sure the details of what that's called or how that works, but
Yeah, that's accurate. It's considered a revenue bond. The revenues from the service pay for the debt service. If you don't have the service, you don't pay the fee, and so it's 100% funded through the revenues from the users, which was why the feasibility study was so important, to be able to estimate how many users we would have. It's important to note too, in the estimated costs, that there's some assumptions made by the user or by the respondents about what the cost of the bond payment would be to the residents. So those are not fixed numbers. They could go down. I think they're very conservative numbers based upon the actual cost of construction. So I wouldn't want anybody to get stuck on what the actual fees were that were presented in this proposal. We have a little more detail in the actual RFPs themselves, I think, that we gave to each of you, that shows what the fees are that would go to the operator for their operating fees, the portion that would be retained for a refresh fee, in other words, money that we'd put aside to refresh the infrastructure, and then there's an estimate in that number of what the ISP fee would be. The piece that we don't know yet that is part of that total cost is what the actual cost of the construction will be. That's the piece that can really, that we will see some fluctuation in based upon subscription rates and cost of construction and everything else.
So just to make sure I have it clear, and anyone who was having similar questions is clear, there wouldn't be any other city revenues backing those bonds. So there was no backstop with a property tax or sales tax.
Correct.
And if, for whatever reason, there aren't enough subscribers, do the smaller group of subscribers just pay more or pay longer towards the bond repayment?
So that would be the first option, is yes, that we would, you adjust your user fees to pay for the service.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I didn't give any bad answers in that pre-meeting question.
Councilmember Bradshaw, if I could respond as well. Excuse me, they had ample data from their other subscriber cities, of which we relate closely to some that show take rates that are significantly higher than it would take for us to cash flow our system. So they were very comfortable with the idea that this system will pay for itself, and we were too. So
Not only did we have the study that we did, the survey that we did, but then prior to that, Utopia had done studies where they felt very comfortable, really comfortable saying that they knew that we would have the take rate necessary. So that is reassuring. Thank you.
Alan, if I could, Mayor, could I ask a question of Alan?
Sure.
On the commencing of construction, It seems to me, and this is just exposing me to a silly memory flaw, of course, I'm sure. But it seems to me that Utopia said that upon signing of the contract, they could begin construction within about 3 months rather than 6 months. And there are other committee members here who can prove me wrong and show very publicly how bad my memory is. But what are your recollections?
I wish I had my notes,
I don't either.
but I know where they are, and I could go collect them.
I can respond to that, I think.
Please.
Utopia did indicate that they are just finishing a couple projects. They do have inventory on hand that they had pre-purchased for other projects that haven't signed yet, and that they have availability of their crews and subcontractors to get started on this in a quick manner. I think that 6 months was based on, just their standard response, but they did indicate that they felt that within a couple months they could be boots on the ground and start, because they have done preliminary engineering. They've done most of the design work.
Thanks.
So yes, your memory is correct, mostly.
If I could help to muddy the water a little bit, 4 months sticks in my head that they'd be mobilized. Yeah, 120.
I just, for my own curiosity, how many of these huts will need to be built in the city?
I don't remember.
And have those locations, I'm assuming that these, through the engineering, they've identified locations?
Yes.
I think it was 8.
Do you remember,
And
Lloyd?
they're only like 20 by 20 or 10 by 10? Or they're not super huge?
They're not big.
Yeah, there's like a shed, like a
Like a
backyard shed,
Okay.
and I think 12 to 18. I don't remember.
Okay.
Somewhere between 1 and
That's
100.
that's getting in the weeds
Yeah,
a little bit,
yeah,
but I'm
somewhere
just
between.
curious as we see these popping up
Yes.
around town. Thanks.
Any other questions?
So I had a question from a resident, and I'm guessing that we might have more accurate information as we get an actual, as we get into contract negotiations. But the question was, what's the year-to-year estimate for construction, materials, services, bond interest, and revenue by service category subscriptions, showing current estimates for when the project will start paying off the bond principal and estimated timeline to pay for the entire bond. So that kind of detail, I'm guessing that we would find that within the contract negotiations, and then we would, before we make a decision, we
That
would,
is something we didn't address in the RFP. We didn't get that detailed.
yeah.
We didn't require that, so that would be part of the contract negotiations and the critical path or the design of the project.
So we would have that information, obviously, prior to signing a contract, and it would also be public information.
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure I completely understand what he's asking for there. So I don't know that I could say that we would necessarily have all of that information. I'm not sure I understand what he's asking for.
Okay,
I mean, generally speaking,
yeah.
yes, that type of information comes through contract negotiations and then pre-construction meetings with the contractors and things like that. But I'm afraid I wouldn't want to make a definitive statement that every single bit of that information is available or even relevant.
Thank you.
Okay. But obviously, we'll be getting more details as we're moving through the process, and it all is a public process as we discuss the contract negotiations and then as we decide to approve them.
I have a few questions if I may.
Sure.
So my questions are a little different in thinking of take rates and this being a city-owned system. And Utopia installed, when I think of any utility that's done this multiple times throughout the country or local, inside Utah, they install it and then I would imagine, I'm not familiar with their business practices, but then they would market it and try to increase those subscribers to have as many users as possible. In this model, it's a little different. Was there discussions about whose responsibility it is to market, to advertise, to fuel calls from when the internet goes down, and walk me through some of those discussions and where our understanding or agreements are there?
Good question. Both Strata Networks and Utopia Fiber had a pretty aggressive and comprehensive marketing plan. And so we would be working with them through the contract to engage their services to do the marketing. And kind of on the same topic, Richard had talked about some close cities here that are comparable to Bountiful City. A couple of years ago, Utopia gave us a take rate in Centerville, and it was 42% or something like that. They just reported to us that it's like 48%. I think 40% was the target on the RFP for all of the estimates. And so we felt pretty comfortable that if Centerville is approaching 50%, that we could at least get 40. But the marketing is a critical part.
So do we know what their efforts were to make households and businesses aware of that? And I guess along those lines, so it's a little different when we own it and they maybe have a little less skin in the game, maybe. And so wanting to understand, if they have that expertise, at what point do they say that's our responsibility and versus theirs?
That'll be part of the contract negotiations, and there's some questions I can't answer regarding what their marketing procedures were in their previous cities. But I know they've talked about door hangers and mailers and reaching out to our utility billing customers, and they have incentive to increase the take rate for themselves also. But that's where we're anxious to, as we go through this process, talk to Idaho Falls, Bozeman / Yellowstone Fiber, and Woodland Hills and find out the process that they went through.
Okay, so the costs that are illustrated in the packet is just for construction, it's not maintenance or those things, or what level of?
So which cost in the packet? The total cost is for building, and then the ongoing operations and maintenance would be taken care of by the subscriptions.
Okay, so any marketing or advertising or business plans would be above and beyond the costs illustrated?
The original marketing would be part of the original contract and the entire project. The total
marketing
cost for the project.
The marketing would be the responsibility unless we negotiated otherwise in the contract through our recommended provider, which is Utopia. The cost for that is captured in their fee to us.
Fee that they've already provided?
The monthly fee that they've recommended, yeah. So, in their cost proposal, and I apologize, we didn't have the breakdown in the packet.
Construction of the network.
Their fees to the city would be, or fees to residents would be for 250 megabits, $27 a month. For 1 gig is $31 a month. For 10 gigs is $60 a month. On top of that, there's the ISP fee, which they estimate to be, if I remember right, was it $15 or $25 a month?
18 on page 5.
Yeah, 18, I think. And so that fee, which then gets passed on to the resident, in addition, what gets added to that fee is then the cost of the per user portion of the debt service payment that we would repay, that 45 million, for the total cost to the resident that we estimate for 1 gig service to right now be around $75, $75. That fee pays for all of their operations, their maintenance, their marketing, everything that comes with the service. Does that answer your question, Jesse?
I think so. So they take care of all marketing, and it's part of the fee that they've already given us.
Yes.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know.
Yep.
Good question. What other questions do we have, council?
Then may I, okay, go ahead.
Just a quick question. One thing that I like that Council Member Higginson mentioned is there's been some kind of deep dive looking at other cities that are comparable to Bountiful City, what the take rates have been there. And I'm just wondering if during that research phase and looking into these other cities, what happened with other internet providers in those cities? Did they come in with their own marketing campaigns? Was there a stiff competition, kind of where they're in the marketplace? I mean, competition is good, but I'm just wondering what did that look like in these cities? Did you talk to them at all?
Regarding
about that?
cities that are owning the
No,
network, or just all of them?
And where Utopia has gone in, or even Strata, has there been like an increase in market-based competition from, like, let's say CenturyLink or Comcast, and
We haven't done a,
reduced fees on those ends, trying to, compete with what's happening?
Can I address that? So in our first round of interviews, I think it was Strata Networks mentioned that as soon as we announce that we're going to bring fiber in, typically what happens in other cities is the existing providers will offer an incentive or an enticing rate and try to get people to sign up to a long-term contract. So they haven't necessarily come in with additional services, but what they do is they tout their existing service and then try to get people into their contracts. Any city that has announced that they're going to have the utility model immediately gets sued by all of the existing providers, which is, of course, why no one does that much anymore. So, but that's what the plan of those existing providers has been, according to that first round of interviews. And then when we talked to Magellan as well, I remember the folks at Magellan mentioning that that's what we can expect, that they'll come in with an enticing rate and try to hook folks up with a long-term contract. So, and still take rates for the fiber networks or where they need to be. So.
I can just add a comment to that too. I had somebody recently reach out to me. I'm the point of contact for franchise agreements in the city, and they were looking to get a franchise agreement with the city to deploy fiber in the city. Just as a courtesy, I said, yeah, here's the application, here's the information, just submit it to me when you're ready. Just an FYI, you should know that our city council is considering a fiber network a city-owned fiber network in the city. They responded back and said, thanks, we're not gonna apply, we'll wait and see what the city council does. So I got the impression from them that if the city council approves a city-owned fiber network, that they're not interested, that they can't compete with the prices.
Yes.
Let me turn back on my mic. Do you have any further information? I do think hearing that information about lawsuits, I'm just curious, do you know kind of any additional information about that?
About the lawsuits? I think it's only been where cities decide to go with the utility model, where the entire city will be assessed to install the utility and run it. Where it's subscriber funded like we're planning on, I don't think they've had the same problem.
Clint, could I just ask you a question? What is your opinion on that, on the basis or standing for a lawsuit in this arena?
To my knowledge, most of the lawsuits are more something of the past. As Councilmember Higginson has said, it's kind of evolved and changed. And most of the lawsuits that I'm aware of, it was at least 5-10 years back that those were instituted, and it was based on what he said, a different model than what we're doing. I'm not sure we'll have. I don't anticipate there would be any lawsuits with what the council is
If I
pursuing
could,
here.
one other thing. Utopia pointed out to us in this last interview that they have settlement agreements with virtually all of the players in this space that say that if they stay within their scope, they are not allowed to sue. So we have protection in using them. If we decide to use them, we have the protection of those settlement agreements that we can't be sued. Yeah. So that was a nice thing too. So I mean, the bottom line, it came down to be a fairly easy decision because of the fact that we're getting a better network, the one that we wanted, for less money, city-owned, and protected from legal filings, et cetera. I mean, it was a pretty easy decision in the end, I think. Yeah.
Just so we can all move toward that place of, I just want to see if the council is comfortable with the direction we're heading. We just need to be able to give staff direction to know if we're interested in moving forward to contract negotiations with Utopia. Any other questions that any of you have to know, any additional concerns or thoughts that any of you have?
I think this is very helpful. It's helpful to see actual bids. I think it would be helpful for me to also see, when this comes before us as a council item to vote on, a little more information on how Utopia will help us get our take rates that we anticipate. What actual items they're responsible for, and how we can increase our take rates as much as possible, and as a result, decreasing our risk, if that's possible.
Can I respond to that? So that will be part of the contract negotiations as to what their role will play in that. Sadly, the marketing director for Utopia was unable to be at our last interview, but she was at the first interview. And she was a wealth of information about what they do to push the marketing. Funny, I think both of the last interview folks mentioned that door hangers in the neighborhood where the fiber is being installed is the most effective thing, or at least an extremely effective tool that they both use. So if people know that the disruption to their street or whatever coming by is fiber, and they get a door hanger to remind them, it's been very successful. But that'll be part of contract negotiations.
If I could just add to that, I'm living in a neighborhood that is they just finished putting fiber in my neighborhood. And the door hanger and just the construction, which really, although it is, as Lloyd describes, kind of like a little mini tornado in your neighborhood, it is actually really not very disruptive to the streets. And you just see guys in the neighborhood working, but they're not really interfering with anything. But my point is, just about everybody I know, when they got the door hanger in my neighborhood, called and wanted to know when they could get it.
What city is that? What city is that?
It's Kaysville.
If I could just offer, I live in Syracuse, and Utopia is installing in Syracuse. They haven't come in front of my house yet, but we did receive a postcard. And I found that postcard taped to the front of the fridge. Wasn't my doing, but somebody else in the house noticed that. And there it stays.
What other questions do you have? Are we ready to move forward with that direction? Okay. Any other last questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Let's hear it.
That's okay. I'm just grateful. I know this has been a long process, but I am glad that we are at this point, and that I feel like because we have taken our time and done our due diligence, I feel like as a city we will have the best option with it being city-owned and with a good provider. So I know I'm the first to say I wish government moved faster. But in this instance, because it's such a big decision and such a big financial commitment for our residents, I'm grateful that we took the time to really figure out the best option. So thank you for doing all of that and for all the many presentations over the last few years. So, but I'm very excited that we're finally in this spot. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just offer one little
Sure.
follow-up. I wanted to make a comment about Strata. Strata Networks has always been very good. They helped us get across the threshold of trying to consider whether we wanted a city-owned project. They've been very responsive and they've been very good. The pricing and some of the configuration of the network was probably the big difference of not going with Strata. But as Gary, I think, has mentioned to council a few times, the 3 words, good, fast, and cheap, pick 2. And so we feel that although we know that there were citizens and our citizens that have been very anxious to get this done years ago, we felt it was important that we do due diligence and that we go through this process. And I do agree with Jesse and others that I think we're going to have a really good product. And down the road, years, everybody's going to say, we're so glad we finally got it done, and it's a good solution. The last thing I had was, we've had a question underlying this whole process is, in which partner will we have the most confidence? And so based on that, that's why we come to the council with the recommendation that we proceed with contract negotiations with Utopia.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. Okay, we will now move forward, and we will ask our attorney, Mr. Drake, to help us in a open meetings training.
Exciting. So we'll get it up here on the board. We'll get through as much as you can. You've all had this training before. You've received it from me. You've received it from other entities that you go to. As you know, it's required by law that we do this once a year. So here we go. Go ahead and next slide. This is just the purpose of the act, the public policy behind it. It's the intent that we take our actions openly, and we conduct, and that you as a city council or commissions conduct deliberations openly. Next slide. So just want to read the definition of a meeting. A meeting means the convening of a public body or a specified body with a quorum present, including a workshop or an executive session, whether in person or by means of electronic communications, for the purpose of discussing, receiving comments from the public about or acting upon a matter over which the public body or specific body has jurisdiction or advisory power. So just a reminder that with our body, 3 members of the council are a quorum, and anytime 3 members of the council meet, that needs to be publicly noticed, with the exceptions that we'll talk about in a second. And then also just that the mayor and 2 council members is not a quorum. Mayor and 3 council members is a quorum. So, okay, next one. The exceptions to that I just mentioned are a chance gathering or a social meeting, Christmas parties, a city employee summer barbecue, something like that. Obviously, council would be invited and we'd want you there, and that's not a meeting. Next. Just on the subject of electronic meetings, we're going to have more discussion about that, but just know that electronic meetings can happen. Just one thing on that sub-bullet point, so you can meet electronically, notice requirements still apply, everything still applies. Public must have a means to attend. Keyword there, attend, doesn't mean that public has to participate, but the public needs to be able to attend electronically, okay? As far as closed meetings go, we're allowed by law to have closed meetings for specific reasons that we'll discuss, but all meetings start and close as open meetings. So, next slide. So the reasons that we can have closed meetings, discuss an individual's character, professional competence, or physical or mental health, discuss security personnel, devices, or systems, investigate proceedings regarding allegations of criminal misconduct, strategy sessions to discuss the exchange, lease, or sale of property, and then just a note that anytime there's a purchase, obviously that has to be public, but we don't want to do our negotiating and discussion in the open. That would be less effective and more costly for our residents. Just a reminder, there is never a requirement for a meeting to be closed. That's a discretionary thing. Next. The process to close a meeting is a quorum must be present. 2/3 of the body must vote to close it. It is a roll call vote. The body there must be an open meeting first, and then what must be disclosed. The roll call vote by name, the reasons for holding the meeting, and the location of the meeting. Just a reminder too on that closed session meetings are still recorded, and there are limited minutes that are taken. There is an exception to that when it comes to the character and competency of an individual. The reason for that is that might be some very sensitive things that are discussed, and that's not something that would be recorded. In order to do that, it requires the head of the legislative body, in this case the mayor, to sign an affidavit at the end of the meeting that says all we discussed was the character and competency of an individual. Next. So in a closed meeting, you can't approve an ordinance, resolution, rule, regulation, contract, or appointment. You can't approve anything. You can't interview somebody to fill an elected position. You can't take a final action. Basically, the only vote that is allowed in a closed session is the vote to go out of the closed session and back into the open session. Notice requirements, written notice at the place where the meeting will be held. Sean always posts notices here in City Hall. We place notices in our newspaper, we put them on our website, we put them on social media, we put them on the Utah Public Notice website, and there are some exceptions, but generally it's 24 hours prior to a meeting. There are some other things, some land use related things, some tax related things that require more than 24 hours notice. Okay. Emergency meetings. The law allows for emergency meetings, things that are urgent. In that case, it's just the best practicable notice that can be given. If there's power, that might just be to put it on the internet, on social media. If there's not power, it might be that we just post it on the front of our city hall. And the minutes must include that there's a statement of unforeseen circumstances. I think the most recent and probably the only example since I've been here in Bountiful where we've had to have an emergency meeting was during the windstorm. And we needed to convene to have the city council together to discuss how we were going to deploy resources. And so we just did the best we could, put it on our website, put it on our building, do the best we can. Okay. Meetings are required to have minutes. That's the records of our meetings. Next slide. Both written minutes and recordings of open meetings are public record. We put that on our website, so that's available to the public. They can obviously still request it as well. Okay. So the minutes must include the date, time, and place of the meeting, the names and the members of that are present or absent, the substance of all matters that were proposed, discussed, or decided, the names and substance of information from individuals giving testimony or comments, individual votes on each matter, and any additional information requested by a member. Going back to that third bullet point, the substance of all matters proposed, discussed, or provided. That's just a reminder to the council and to the public that might wonder why there's really not much discussion or response during public comment about something that they might bring to the meeting, and that's the main reason right there is that it's not something that's been on the agenda. It's not something that we would really want to discuss without noticing it to our residents and to the public first. Okay. So pending minutes must be made available to the public within 30 days after holding an open meeting. And then pending minutes must clearly indicate that the public body has not approved the minutes and they're subject to change, so that there's, a big draft stamp or something like that across it. Okay, so you can violate the Open and Public Meetings Act. That's found in Utah Code Section 52-4-305. What I've underlined there is a critical thing. It has to be intentional. What the law states is, in addition to any other penalty under this chapter, a member of the public body who intentionally violates or intentionally abets or advises a violation of the closed meeting provisions of this chapter is guilty of a Class B misdemeanor. That's a harsh and serious consequence. And then further in 52-4-301, a court can void any action in violation of the law. Oftentimes, a violation can be cured by just simply bringing it back in front of the public and having that discussion in a subsequent meeting. If the city is in violation of that, there's a potential that a court may order that there be costs that are awarded and paid by the city. Next. So who can enforce the act? The courts can, the Attorney General can, in our county, the Davis County Attorney can, and a private citizen who is an aggrieved party can. Next. There are restrictions or I should say like statute of limitations on when a corrective action can be pursued. That's 90 days. It's 30 days unless it involves bonds, notes, or debt. That's obviously because usually in the case of bonds, notes, or debt, that's something that is voted on and then it has to move forward. Interest rates and things like that are impacted, contracts. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of moving parts that happen there. Which is the reason for those deadlines or statute of limitations. And then my favorite slide, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And we really do believe at Bountiful City in being open and transparent. We know that you do too, and we appreciate your support for the transparency and what we try to do to be open and transparent to the public. I do want to just spend a few minutes on ethics too. There's a few more slides. That next one that you're going to have, Miranda, you can skip that one because it's basically the same thing. Just want to remind everybody on the council and the public that there is a Municipal Officers and Employees Ethics Act. The purpose of that is to establish standards of conduct for municipal officers and employees to require these persons to disclose actual or potential conflicts of interest between their public duties and their personal interests. So all of us, or all of you and some of the staff members should have gotten an email from Shauna in the last week or two just saying it's time to fill out the conflict of interest form that we do every year. There you go. And Shauna keeps those on record and they're available to the public for anybody that would like to see those documents. Go ahead and next slide. So it basically does two things. It sets up a disclosure system for conflicts of interest, and it describes the crimes that can be committed by public officers or employees. Next one. So basically, you can't use your office or position to benefit yourself or others. Obviously, other than everything you do is intended to benefit the citizens of Bountiful City. But we're talking about more specific business interests and financial interests, things like that. The focus really is on economic or special privileges, which we'll talk about here in a second. Next. So here's the things that end up being crimes. It's a crime to disclose or improperly use private or controlled or protected information that was acquired by way of an official position. So using our open meetings example, let's say the city was thinking about acquiring a piece of property to put in this beautiful new park that would enhance the values of all of the neighborhood surrounding, and there's some open land there, and you're privy to that information as a council member, and then you decide that you're going to go out and buy some land next to that, or to buy the land that is the city seeking to purchase because you know that the city wants it, and you can get some really good money off of that. That would be an example of some private information. So back to the open meetings, any information in a closed meeting needs to remain in the room and only be discussed as necessary. Next one, user attempt to use an official position to further substantially a personal economic interest. Basically, if you have, a business in the city or you own property that you lease in the city and you use your position to bring tenants to your particular building that you own or to bring an economic interest that would benefit your personal land, that would be an example of that. It's a crime to knowingly receive, accept, or take or seek a gift of or economic benefit that would tend to improperly influence a person carrying out their official duties. So, great example of that is just, there's a developer that wants to come in and put in a new subdivision, and in an effort to build a relationship with you, they offer to give you their box seats at the next jazz game. That would be an example of an improper gift. It is allowable under law to receive gifts. They need to be infrequent and under the value of $50. Typically, about the only time we see gifts as municipal employees is around Christmas time. We might see a fruit basket or some chocolates or something like that. And then the last one is receive compensation for assisting another person or entity in a transaction with the city. That's pretty self-explanatory. We just try and we just have to avoid any personal benefits that we might receive from our positions. Next slide. We'll skip that one. We just talked about them. So disclosure is the most important part of this. You are required to disclose if you have an interest in any business or entity that does business with the city or that is regulated by the city. As I've always said, you're welcome, if you ever have any questions about this, to please reach out to me. With regard to those disclosure forms, those may change at any moment. You might acquire a business or a business interest that is in the city, and all we have to do is just go in and update that form. And then you must disclose any personal interest that conflicts with your public duties. And there's two ways to do that. The first one is that form that we've talked about, and the next one is that if there's something on an agenda that you, my personal preference is that you just, right when let's say it's agenda item number 7, right as agenda item number 7 is called, you would just announce to the mayor, or if you are the mayor, you would just announce that you have a conflict of interest, state the conflict of interest, and then it is my personal advice that you then step out of the room, recuse yourself, completely step out of that if you're going to recuse yourself. I would note that the law does not require you. The law requires you to disclose. It does not require you to recuse. Basically, the question that I ask is can you render a fair and impartial decision? And then there's some things to consider as we go to getting to this last slide. There you've got the written and verbal disclosures, not required to recuse. And then the two considerations that I think are important to consider is how will it be viewed by the public, and does it build the community? So in a situation where you may not necessarily think that it's a conflict or that you are going to be affected by anything, I would just strongly urge you to consider those questions. And then, as I said, in a prior city I used to work for, I had a planning commissioner that worked in the real estate field, and so he would often have conflicts. But he would state the conflict, and then he'd sit on the dais and he wouldn't leave. And I just thought that was not a great practice. If you're not going to participate, then don't participate. Go outside and step outside the room, and we can come back and get you when that item is done being discussed. And that's it. Any questions?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great training, great
Right on time.
reminders. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we will take just a quick, very, very brief break, and we'll be right back to start our regular council meeting.